this video of the How to Tune Holley Terminator X for Beginners series, we're going to go over the basics of data logging. So the two primary things that we're looking for in our data log are to make sure that the engine is doing what we're asking it to do, and then also to make sure that what we're telling it to do is what it's trying to do. Perfect example of that would be if you have 30 degrees of ignition timing in your ignition table, but you're only actually seeing 27 degrees of timing at the engine. You need to figure out where your 3 degrees went, and data logging can be really helpful with that, because odds are you're commanding some sort of a modifier somewhere that's taking your 3 degrees away, whether that's knock control or coolant temp, air temp based corrections, so on and so forth. So there's a whole lot of complicated stuff going on within the ECU, and you can't just monitor all of it real time. So if you're driving around staring at your laptop screen or driving around staring at your little touchscreen monitor, it's super dangerous. You're never going to be able to see the data the way that you need to be able to see it. You're never going to be able to analyze it correctly. You're going to miss a whole bunch of stuff, and odds are you're probably going to end up crashing the car.
Holy cow, I'm totally going so fast! Oh, fuck!
So we'll jump into the software, and I'll walk you through some of the basic stuff you need to know. There's a lot going on in the software, but 3/4 of it's kind of pointless. So I'll show you some of the stuff that you can ignore, some of the stuff that you can do, and we'll go from there. And if you hear a bunch of background noise, there's somebody in the parking lot that's just been blasting music as loud as it'll go for the last 3 hours, and debating getting a rocket launcher and blowing up their car. Alright, if we dive into the software here, this is just a sample Holley file, so I don't even know what this is, doesn't really matter. But basically, if we go to data log here, open data log, this is where we would open up the log, and it opens up a whole entirely new screen. Before we look at that, this little clipboard here is how you would start what's called a PC log, which basically means you're going to be logging this information directly to your laptop. It definitely does not work as well, doesn't log as fast, and it's limited by your actual computer and what it can do. You'll find if you use this a lot that, depending on the car especially, in wiring and a lot of other variables, that this will cut in and out, and you'll get big huge gaps between data points and stuff. So you're much better off just logging onto the SD card and then putting the SD card into your computer. But once we open up a data log, this is what we see. So now that we have our log open, if we look over on the left, these are all of the channels that are active and currently on the screen. If you click on these arrows left or right, you can go into, it's got to be the 300th phone call today. Damn it. Right, let's try this again. So if you click on the arrow tab, you can go through a bunch of different screens, which makes it really nice. So you can set up, if you want one just for the dyno, one for the drag strip, one for driving around on the street, and one for cold start, however you wanted to do it. And if you want to change what you're looking at within the screen, just go down here to edit views. And they've made this all drag and drop, so it makes it nice and easy. And you can also change the name of each channel. So if you wanted this just be dyno, just type that in. Everything with a green check mark means it's already in one of these boxes. And if you wanted to add, I don't know, cylinder 6 timing correction, you just drop it in here. And then you can see now it has a check mark next to it. Once you set these channels up the way that you want them, click on OK, and it brings up this. So basically with this, if you click yes, once you close out of the software and you open it back up, whatever layout you have is what it's going to open up the next time. If you click no, you're still going to view what you currently just did, but once you close the software, it's going to go back to however it was previously. The next thing that I do is, if you click on, you can see our red RPM trace here. If you click on this top box, it will turn that channel on and off. But this second one underneath it is for these borderline useless bars. I don't like these. And once you get a bunch of different channels all on the screen at the same time like this, if you turn all of these on, like, you can't even see what you're doing anymore. I refuse to believe that anybody would want to look at a data log like this. So I would encourage you to turn all of these off. You have got to be kidding me. All right, the next thing that we'll look at is the actual scaling, which are these values over here. This would be your minimum and your maximum. Where this one really kind of shows its importance is TPS. If you have it scale 0 to 100, it just basically goes off of the screen. It makes it really hard to see. So if you just change this to a little bit more, now we can bring this where we can see it. As you can see here, there's like a little bit of nonsense going on, as to where if it was scaled all the way up to 100, you might not catch that. And you can do this for every channel. And the other thing is when you start overlaying, like what the actual boost is, what the target boost is, you can make these channels like overlay one another, as to where if the scaling is off, then one might be down here, the next one might be up here, and it makes it a lot harder to see how you would actually compare the two channels. Again, this is going to be the basics of walking you through what's here, so we can get more in depth and lining things up and whatnot in another video. So the next thing that you're probably going to want to do is learn how to zoom in and zoom out to be able to see what you want to see as best as you can. So you have your zoom in buttons, your zoom out buttons. This one here is zoom all, which is going to give you the most zoomed out version that there is. It makes it difficult to see specific things that's happening, but it helps you find your spot in the run a lot easier. And then there's zoom last, so this would basically bring you to whatever the view was before clicking on that. I don't use any of these for the most part. I'll use zoom all, and then past that I'm just like, okay, here's the meat and potatoes of what we wanted to see. So then I'll just left click, drag, and then now that's full screen. And then say that you did another pull and it's over here, you can drag this whole box wherever you want it, you can bring it back. And then you can also increase the size down here. So I find that to be the easiest way. If you click on anywhere, any of this data over here is updated with where the cursor is. And then you can also use the arrow keys if you want to move in the smallest increments possible. Now we have these red and green arrows here, which is the set start point, set end point, which maybe is labeled a little different than I would expect. So let's say that this whole log here was 20 minutes long, and all we really wanted to see was this right here. If we click here, click on set start point, click here, set end point, then it's basically going to chop off and eliminate all of this excess. And then you can go to File, Save As, save it as a separate data log, and now you're going to have a much smaller data log that's easier to navigate through. I try to be selective on when I start and stop the data log so that I'm only recording what it is that I want. So again, I don't use that feature very often. Next up we have automatic set zero time and set zero time. So zero time is actually, if you look up here, it's a timestamp on the data log from the time that the log starts until it stops. But for like a drag race car, like let's say we wanted the timer to start right here, which a lot of times you'll do, either it's off of throttle position. Once you go to 100% throttle, you can start your timer, or even more ideally like a trans brake or a two-step, once you release that button, you can start your timer there, in which case you would just hit set zero time, and it asks you now, so here's where we told it to set the zero time. So here we're at 0, and then now come out here. You see this is 9 seconds into the run. So where this becomes really helpful is like right off of the release of the trans brake. The first couple of seconds in, if you have any wheel spin or you want to set a time-based rev limiter, time-based boost control, so on and so forth. That's the easiest way to do that. Now you can set the auto 0, which again, once you let off the trans brake or whatever, but you basically any channel you can use to start that. I find that I just prefer doing it manually. I've fought with it using the trans brake to start, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, or if like within the data log someone's pushed the trans brake twice, then it seems like it just never goes to the one that you want it to. So I always set that time-based manually. And then the other thing that you can do is here. If you use boost time, you can just graph out that channel, and if it had a trans brake that you're using for the boost control, then it would set up your time just perfectly. So I try to use that. So even if it's not a turbo car and you have a two-step or a trans brake line lock, whatever, if you're using anything that you're releasing to start your drag pass, then you can still use boost time just to avoid having to set your start point and all that good stuff. After that, we have this export tab. You can save basically the log wherever maybe you want to. Kind of pointless. This properties tab is very overlooked. So you can set up all of your, what track you're at, what lane you're at, what round it is, all of your time slip information. This is really helpful for you nitrous guys. You can put all of your, weather bullshit in here. Chassis, depending on just how much stuff you're paying attention to, you can put it all into your data log, so anytime you open up a log, you know exactly what was going on. Down and run, gear, horsepower, torque, all that good stuff. And then you have just miscellaneous notes. So all this stuff is really helpful. So especially if you're sending data logs to people, two things. One, fill this stuff out. It'll make it a lot easier for them to see what's going on. And then the other thing is if you go to File and then Save As, save your data logs in a way that makes sense. Like, what racetrack you're at, what day it's at, or if there's a particular issue, like just label it to where they're looking at it and it makes sense. Because if you get a data log that's just, this is the file name, like it just makes it difficult to make sense of any of it, especially when somebody sends you 13 logs all at the same time. So definitely take advantage of that. Again, that's right up here under this little clipboard that says properties. This E just brings you right back into this screen. This here is your scatter plot. So you can set this up off of any channel. You can set up all the colors. I don't tend to use this too often, but it can be nice for picking up on trends. So like say if this was a road course car and it was driving for 20 minutes at a time, if you set up this scatter plot, like you can see like maybe it's heavily populated here at 3,000, 3,500 RPM. So you know that that's where the car's spending the majority of its time. And then when you get these couple little dots out here, like I don't want to say you can ignore them, but they're clearly not as important as where you're spending all of your time. This would be an entirely different video in itself. I think a majority of people aren't going to use this. Next thing is if you right click, you get all of this stuff, which basically is how you're going to view stuff, like what it looks like. So if we go to like this, like why is this in here? Who would monitor like this? Guess maybe if you're just colorblind or something. But who knows? If that's what you like, then view it that way. But I find this works better. Some people hate the black background. I actually prefer it. A lot of this stuff, like, it'll change the way that these things look. I don't find any of this to be worthwhile. I don't change any of it. This maximize thing might be kind of nice, but then you can't really see what's going on. If you just push escape, that goes away. So there's all kinds of stuff in here you can customize. Again, I don't find there to be any reason to do so. Maybe if you wanted to change colors, that would actually be pretty helpful. I have played with that on occasion. Sometimes, like, you'll find that a couple of channels that you just throw over here, and then for whatever reason they end up either being the same color or very similar or hard to tell. There's certain things that I'll basically make the same color. Like green is almost a universal color for engine RPM, so a lot of times I'll just change RPM to be green. So probably two of the most beneficial things that you'll find in here. One, if I get an ECU that can't do a data log comparison, I'm almost not interested in using it. And then second, if we go back into our normal software, and if you go under here under data log, and you click on activate overlay, if you've tuned a bunch of cars, this might not be quite as helpful to you as it is to somebody that's maybe a beginner. But basically now, if we go here into the data log, oh, another thing that you can do that's helpful is you can chop this down. So now you can kind of look at both screens at the same time. But if we click on the data log here, just hold the cursor, we can actually watch exactly where the engine ran throughout the whole data log. So obviously you're watching the ball bounce around on the green line. The green line is like the overlay of where it's been out the whole time, and then the ball is where it is at the current position of the cursor. So this can be, again, pretty helpful if you're not familiar. Like, I've done so many cars, I can just look at this and kind of click around and know what we're working with, but every now and then I'll still click on it and it can just make life a little bit easier. Now, if there's one takeaway that you get from this video, the number one thing that you do not want to do on the fueling tab, so any table that you go into, the trace will overlay, but do not just make your changes where these green lines are. So like, if you just do this and then go over here because you were in the green line here, and just keep, making all your changes like this. I'm just obviously putting some arbitrary numbers in here, but do not tune like that. So once you go over here into the graph, look what happens. This is how you get an engine that runs very unhappy. So you need to be aware. If you make changes in these cells right here, you're going to need to make similar changes everywhere else. Everything is basically a bunch of trends. We want everything to be really smooth.
It's smooth, man.
This is, you can almost say too smooth, it just looks flat. Be really careful with these smooth buttons too, because they just start wiping out everything that you've done, kind of make it run around in circles. And the next thing, if you click on, you can go to panel, and go to 2. And now you can actually split the screen up to look at channels this way. I don't use this too often, occasionally I will, but the majority of the other tuning softwares that I use will just overlay everything onto one screen, so that's kind of gotten used to looking at it, and I like to just do everything under one unless there's just something weird going on and you want to closely look at something a specific way. Now, if we go up here to comparison, compare data log, now we can open up a different log, and these are both the same data log, just at different, one's at different time points. But we can look at all of the solid The solid lines first is our primary folder or primary data log, and the one with the dotted lines is our secondary. And then if you come up here to nudge comparison, basically it's going to move it to where you can overlay the two lines. So now you can see we have lines overlaying directly over top of each other. And this is kind of convenient to see it this way, being that's both the same log, because you can see just how well it does that. Again, if you had two separate data logs, you might want to use like the transbreak or TPS or something, some sort of a point to where you're going to overlay them on top of each other. So if you're driving around for 45 minutes and you drive around again for 45 minutes and you overlay that data, it's going to be drastically different. So in order to use this, like, you basically are going to want to do like either a pass at the drag strip, or like say you did a third gear pull, and you can start them both at 3,500 RPM or both once you get to 100% throttle and overlay them, but they need to be very similar runs for it to make any sense. And now once you've done that, you have your primary channel on the top and then your overlay on the bottom. And they're never going to be like 110% exactly the same. As you can see, our engine RPM is slightly different, but it's really close. So this works really well for if you're trying to see why one pass of the track was faster than another or slower than another, or stuff like that. And then last but not least, I think a lot of people don't realize you can do this. If you come over here to this, and you put your mouse here, you can see you have this open, and you pull this over, and now you have all this additional information. So basically, throughout the whole data log, it's going to give you what the minimum RPM was, the maximum RPM, average, and so on and so forth. I don't tend to use that too often, but occasionally I'll drag it over just to take a quick peek. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Again, this is just a quick introduction to data logging. As I do more of these videos, we're going to be coming over and looking at the data logging for basically all of it. So at that point, we can go into more specifics of each thing that we're looking at. But for this, just basically trying to show you how to navigate through this, and hopefully you understand how powerful and how important this data logging is. If you're just trying to tune the car without data logging, you're kind of just pissing in the wind. Yes, you can absolutely make a car run well that way, but why not take advantage of the features that you've paid for? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.